The night air over the Obsidian Moon Empire smelled of pine and smoke, and the great hall was filled with light. Hundreds of wolves, both shifted and human in form, gathered under the carved stone arches to celebrate the founding ceremony, the night their empire had been born 2 centuries ago. Banners hung from the rafters, silver thread catching the torchlight, and the low hum of conversation filled every corner of the hall. At the head of the room, on a raised platform, sat Alpha King Draven Ashcroft. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no. Beside him sat his Luna, Lyra Voss, dressed in a deep green gown that matched the emblem of her birth pack. She sat straight-backed, her hands folded in her lap, her expression calm, even though her heart had not felt calm in a long time. 2 years had passed since their bonding ceremony. 2 years since their marriage had sealed a treaty between 2 once warring packs. Lyra had entered that marriage knowing it was not built on love, but she had hoped, in her quiet way, that respect might grow between them. She had worked hard to earn that respect. She had studied pack law, learned the names of every family under Draven's rule, settled disputes with patience, and stood beside him at every gathering, even when he barely looked at her. But something had shifted in recent months. Draven had grown distant, surrounded more and more by council members who whispered that a Luna from a smaller pack was not fit to stand beside an empire as powerful as his. Lyra had heard the whispers too. She had chosen, for the sake of peace, to ignore them. Tonight, she would learn that ignoring them had been a mistake. The wine had been flowing for hours, and Draven's voice had grown louder, his laughter sharper. When one of his council members, a broad-shouldered wolf named Corwin, raised his glass and made a joking remark about the Empire needing a Luna with real blood, not borrowed blood, the hall fell into an uneasy silence. Lyra felt her stomach tighten, but she said nothing. She had learned, over 2 years, that silence was often safer than defense. But Draven did not stay silent. He rose from his seat, swaying slightly, his eyes catching the torchlight in a way that made him look larger, more dangerous. "Corwin speaks the truth," he said, his voice carrying across the hall. "This empire deserves a Luna worthy of its bloodline, not a substitute chosen out of necessity." The hall went completely still. Lyra felt every eye turn toward her. Her chest tightened, but she kept her spine straight, refusing to let her face show the pain blooming inside her. "Draven," she said quietly, hoping to pull him back from the edge of whatever this was. "Sit down. You've had too much wine." But he did not sit down. Instead, he stepped toward her, his voice rising even louder, cruel in a way she had never heard from him before. "I have given you 2 years, Lyra. 2 years of patience, waiting for you to become someone this empire could be proud of, and still, you are nothing more than a placeholder, an unworthy substitute for the Luna I should have had." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Somewhere near the back of the hall, Lyra caught sight of a familiar face. Kane Thorne, Alpha of the Ironwood Pack, Draven's oldest rival, stood near the doorway with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable, though something dark flickered behind his eyes. Lyra rose slowly from her seat. Her hands trembled, but she pressed them flat against her sides, forcing them still. She would not cry, not here, not in front of a room full of wolves who had just watched her be discarded like an old cloak. "You will regret this," she said softly, so only he could hear. Draven laughed, a hollow, careless sound. "I doubt that." She did not answer him again. Instead, she turned, lifted the hem of her gown, and walked out of the hall with her head held high, though inside, something had cracked wide open. By ancient pack law, a rejected Luna was granted 3 days before her formal removal from the Empire. 3 days to gather her belongings, to say goodbye, to accept her fate quietly, and disappear into whatever life remained for her. Most Lunas who had faced rejection in the Empire's long history had used those 3 days to weep, to beg for forgiveness, to try to win back the favor of the mate who had cast them aside. Lyra did not intend to be most Lunas. The morning after the ceremony, she woke before dawn, her eyes swollen from a night of crying she had allowed herself only in private. She washed her face, dressed in simple travel clothes, and began to think clearly for the first time in months. If Draven wanted to discard her, then she would leave with her dignity fully intact. and she would leave knowing exactly what she was walking away from. She began with the pack records. As Luna, she still held access to the treasury ledgers, at least for these final 3 days. What she found there made her blood run cold. For over a year, members of Draven's council, led quietly by Corwin, had been siphoning funds from the pack's grain reserves and selling them to neighboring territories at inflated prices, pocketing the difference. The very council members who had mocked her worthiness had been stealing from the pack they claimed to protect. She copied every page she could, hiding the papers within the lining of her travel bag. If nothing else, the pack elders deserved to know the truth before she left. On the second day, she visited the elders' quarters, an old stone building at the edge of the territory where the pack's founding families lived out their final years. She had always shown them respect, unlike Draven, who rarely visited unless he needed their blessing for something. The eldest among them, a silver-haired woman named Marin, welcomed her with open arms. "I heard what happened," Marin said, guiding her to a chair by the fire. "The whole territory has heard by now." Lyra managed a small, tired smile. "Then you also know I won't be staying. What will you do?" Lyra hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out the copied ledgers. "Before I go, I want you to have this. The council has been stealing from the pack, Corwin, and likely others. I thought you deserved to know, even if I won't be here to see it addressed." Marin's expression darkened as she flipped through the pages. "This is serious, child. You could have simply left without telling us." "I could have," Lyra agreed. "But I still care about the wolves who live here, even if their alpha no longer wants me among them." Marin studied her for a long moment, then reached out and squeezed her hand. "You are more of a Luna than that boy deserves. Wherever you go, you will land on steady feet. I have no doubt of that." Lyra held on to those words as she left, feeling, for the first time in 2 days, a small flicker of strength returning to her chest. That evening, as she walked along the quiet path back toward the Luna's quarters, a figure stepped out from beneath the trees, Kane Thorne. Up close, he was even more striking than she remembered, tall and steady, with sharp eyes that seemed to see straight through the calm mask she wore. "Lyra," he said, his voice low. She stopped, startled, but did not step back. "Alpha Thorne, this is Obsidian Moon territory. It's dangerous for you to be here. I am aware." A faint, almost amused expression crossed his face before fading into something more serious. "I came because I wanted to see for myself if the rumors were true. That Draven humiliated his own Luna in front of his entire pack." Lyra's jaw tightened. "It's true." "He is a fool," Kane said simply, no hesitation in his voice. "I have watched you for 2 years, Lyra. Watched you settle disputes with more wisdom than half his council combined. Watched you hold that empire together while he chased his own pride. He does not deserve what he has." She looked away, unsure how to respond to words so different from the ones that had been thrown at her 2 nights before. "Why does it matter what you think?" "Because I am not offering pity," Kane said. "I am offering an alternative. Ironwood borders Obsidian Moon's eastern lands. If you choose to leave, you would not be walking into nothing. You would be walking into a pack that would value you exactly as you deserve to be valued." Lyra studied him carefully, searching for manipulation, for some hidden motive beneath his words. She found none, only quiet sincerity. "You would take in the Luna your greatest rival rejected. That would look like a political victory to the entire Northern Territories." "It would," Kane admitted, "but that is not why I am asking." Something in his voice made her believe him. She did not answer immediately, but she did not walk away either. The third day arrived cold and clear. By ancient law, Lyra's final act as Luna would take place beneath the full moon, in front of witnesses, where she would formally renounce her title. Word of the ceremony had spread, and by nightfall, the courtyard outside the Great Hall was filled once again, though the mood was far different from 2 nights before. This time, the wolves who gathered watched with quiet respect rather than cruel curiosity. Draven stood near the platform, his expression unreadable. Whatever confidence had fueled his cruelty 2 nights ago seemed to have faded, replaced by something closer to uncertainty as he watched Lyra approach in a plain traveling cloak instead of the fine gowns she once wore as Luna. She stopped before the assembled pack, lifted her chin, and spoke the ancient words clearly, without a single tremor in her voice. I, Lyra Voss, release my bond to the title of Luna of the Obsidian Moon Empire. I release my claim to its throne, and I invoke the founding law that grants a departing Luna the Eastern Treaty Lands, given freely to her at the time of her joining. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Draven's eyes widened slightly. He had clearly forgotten, in his pride, that the treaty lands granted to Lyra at their bonding included a strip of territory that bordered Ironwood. You cannot take that land, he said, stepping forward. I can, Lyra replied evenly. It was written into our bonding contract, signed and witnessed by your own council. I imagine Corwin remembers the details quite well. She let her eyes flick briefly toward the council member, who suddenly looked far less confident than he had 2 nights before. Perhaps the elders would also like to review the treasury records while they're at it. A ripple of confusion, then realization, spread through the gathered wolves as murmurs about the stolen grain funds began to surface. Draven's face darkened, but there was nothing he could do. The law was the law, and he had broken no fewer promises than his council had broken trust. Lyra turned from him without waiting for a response. She walked toward the edge of the courtyard, where Cain Thorne stood waiting, his expression calm, but his eyes steady on hers. You're certain about this? He asked quietly, as she reached his side. I have never been more certain of anything, she said. Behind her, she heard the murmurs of the pack, some already questioning aloud whether they had judged their departing Luna too harshly, whether the Empire had just lost something far more valuable than anyone had realized. She did not turn back to see Draven's face. She did not need to. She had spent 2 years trying to earn his respect. She would not waste another moment waiting for it now. As she and Cain walked toward the border that connected their 2 territories, several pack members who had long respected her quietly fell into step behind them, choosing loyalty to the woman who had always treated them with fairness over loyalty to a throne that had discarded her without a second thought. By the time the moon reached its highest point, Lyra stood at the edge of Ironwood territory, the banners of her new home rising in the distance. Cain stood beside her, not as a rival claiming victory, but as someone who had simply recognized her worth long before anyone else dared to. Welcome home, he said softly. Lyra looked out over the land that would become her new beginning, and for the first time in 2 years, she felt something settle quietly into place inside her chest. Not victory exactly, and not revenge, but something steadier. Peace. Whatever whispers followed her, whatever rumors spread through the northern territories about the humiliated Luna who had walked away with land, loyalty, and the respect of her greatest rival, Lyra no longer cared to listen. She had spent long enough shrinking herself to fit into a throne that never truly wanted her. Now, she intended to stand tall in a place that finally did.